2, 1. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. Welcome back, y'all. It is good to see the thousands tuning in live on Zoom and millions watching on YouTube. It is wonderful to have you here, and we are moving on to a new Masechta. We have been waiting so long to get started on this, and it is so exciting that we're finally able to do it tonight. We are going to be starting Mishnayos Masechet Chullin, which gets a bit gory at times, and we may have some images that we need to show. So if you are squeamish, then good luck with that one. And I've actually just realized that I need to be able to show these images, and I haven't set that up yet. So just give me one last second just to get that. Wouldn't that have been perfect if I had everything ready? Wouldn't that have just been incredible? Alas, I didn't have it ready. So 1 second. We are just going to get that ready for you now, so that when we need it, we are able to call on it, and then it won't be inconvenient at all. So, okay, we're going to have our pictures ready and waiting for us. Oh, I didn't want it there at all. I wanted it in there. Well, let's get that up on the screen anyway. That's going to be a picture that we're going to need a little later, but we don't need it just now. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mishnayos Masechet Chullin. Are we ready? Awesome. That's what we like to hear. So, we're going to be talking a lot about shchita. Going to be talking a lot about slaughtering. And we're going to be talking about when things are permissible to be eaten and when they're not permissible to be eaten. So, starting with chapter 1, Mishnah 1, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, generally we assume that anyone who is doing shchita is going to be proficient in the halachot of shchita. But the question is, what if they are not proficient in the halachas, in the laws of shchita? So, Mishnah says as follows: Hakol shochatin u'shchitasan kashera. That anyone who slaughters, that is capable of halachically slaughtering an animal, if they slaughter that animal, then it is going to be kosher. Says the Mishnah, chutz mecheresh shota v'katan, except for a deaf mute or a shota, which they translate on the screen there as an imbecile. But it's not, we have to be careful with the way that we translate such things. And a katan is a minor, someone under the age of bar mitzvah. Shema yikalkalu b'shchitasan, lest they ruin their slaughter because they don't know how to do it properly. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, fundamentally, if they were not going to be ruining the shchita and not going to be getting it wrong, then it would be okay. Anyone who slaughters an animal, but there are people supervising and watching over them, even if it's a katan, even if it's a minor, shchitasan kashera, then the shechita is going to be kosher, it's going to be valid. Says the Mishnah, shchitas nochri, if it's a non-Jew who does the slaughtering, then what happens is nevela, the animal becomes nevela. It's not going to be allowed to be eaten. It becomes like a carcass. And because it's like a carcass, a metama b'masa, it is going to contract tumah, it's going to contract ritual impurity if someone was to carry it. Says the Mishnah, hashoichet balayla, somebody who slaughters at night, l'chein hasuma sheshachat, or if it's a blind person. So the idea here is that even though it's night, he's confident that he knows the halachas, he feels confident that he did it all correctly, but he couldn't see properly because it was too dark. Or it's a blind person who can't see. So if these people slaughter an animal, shchitas kashera, the Mishnah says their slaughter is valid. Continues the Mishnah, hashoichet b'Shabbos, if a person slaughters on Shabbos, Yom Kippurim, or they slaughter on Yom Kippur, afal pisha mischayev b'nafsho, even though you're not allowed to do it, and you'll be liable to receive the death penalty for slaughtering on Shabbos or on Yom Kippur, shchitaso kashera, the food nonetheless, the meat nonetheless, the animal nonetheless, the shchita is going to be valid. It just can't be eaten on that day. They'll have to wait till after Shabbos or after Yom Kippur before they're able to eat it.
I didn't think you could benefit from anything done on Shabbat that you weren't supposed to do.
Correct. That's why it can't be eaten on that day.
Yeah, but why should you be able to benefit from it at all?
You can't, but others can.
But what happens if the meat is then sold? Surely you're still benefiting from it. Unless you're giving it away.
Maybe.
But
the food can be eaten after Shabbos as long as you wait an appropriate amount of time to compensate for the time that it would have taken if you had done it after Shabbos, if I'm not mistaken. And it will depend on whether they did it b'shogeg, b'mezid, on purpose, by accident. So yeah, while they might not be able to necessarily benefit from it in all situations, other people, I believe, would be able to benefit if the right time had elapsed or lapsed, I should say. Mishnah base hashoichet b'magal yad. What if you use the smooth side of a hand sickle? So the sickle which would be used to harvest crops in the field. So you're not allowed to use a serrated blade, a blade with jagged edges. The blade has to be completely smooth. So if you use a small sickle where it's smooth on one side and you're using the smooth side, you're not using the serrated side. But sor, or you use a small stone, translates it there as a sharpened flint. Uva kaneh, or you're using a reed that was sharpened, says the Mishnah, shchita so kashera, the shchita is going to be valid. Hakol shoichatin, all who are able to slaughter, ula olam shochatin, and they may always slaughter, uvakol shochatin, and they can use anything that's got a smooth, clean edge. Chutz mimagal katsir, you can't use the serrated side of a large sickle. I mean, a large sickle is actually serrated on both sides, so you can't use that. Vahamegera, you can't use a saw, because a saw, as we will know very clearly, has a serrated edge. Vahashinayin, and you can't use teeth of an animal. Vahatziporin, you can't use a fingernail. Mitnei shehein chonkin, because all of these things are not going to give a swift cut through the animal, and so because you're not going to be passing through the parts of the neck that need to be passed through to have a clean shchita, and they're going to choke the animal, strangle the animal a little bit. So all of these types of blades will not be allowed to be used for shchita. Continues the Mishnah. What if you've got blades of a sickle which they bend towards the handle? So what if you were to shecht the animal in the direction of these blades so that technically you're doing a smooth shchita? That is subject to a machlokes. Says the Mishnah, hashoichet b'magal katsir b'derech halichasa. You're using this large sickle, but you're going in the direction of the blades so that it's almost like a smooth swipe. Says the Mishnah, Beis Shammai Poslim, Beis Shammai are not going to allow this. They are going to say the animal is invalid because you might come and cut it the other way with that utensil. Beis Hillel say machshirin. They say that it's kosher. Not that you're allowed to eat it, but it just doesn't. Make it tameh. Says the Mishnah, if you sand down a blade so that it is completely smooth and you get rid of those jagged edges, so you're using a utensil which is qualified as or it's in the category of a serrated blade, but you've sanded it down and smoothed it down so that it's like a smooth blade, says the Mishnah, harehu kasakin. It makes it like a knife and you're allowed to slaughter with it. Okay, here we go. Close your eyes if you are squeamish, because we are going to show on the screen this picture over here. Can everyone see that? So this is a picture of a throat, if I'm not mistaken, and hopefully it's a bit clear. The Mishnah says as follows in Mishnah Gimel: Hashochet mitoch ha-tabas, one who slaughters within the tabas. So a tabas is a ring, a tabat, right? And if you have a look over on this picture at the bottom here, this is a picture of an animal's throat, and you can see that these rings, the cartilage, I believe, of the throat area is formed through different rings of cartilage. I think you can see it a bit clearer in this image, which is not yet appearing on your screen. If I show you this picture, then hopefully it's a bit clearer as well. So these rings up in the top right of the picture, that's the shape of the tabas. So the Mishnah says, let's get rid of that for now. Hashochet mitoch hatabas, v'shier ba melo hachut al pnei chula. So you're slaughtering the animal from within this cartilage, within this ring, at the top of the windpipe. V'shier ba melo hachut al pnei chula, and you've left a very small amount over the surface of the ring, which is completely intact. So the knife has not gone beyond that ring towards the head of the animal. So why are we talking about all of this? So let's just give a couple of introductory remarks. So to be able to do a valid shechita, you have to cut at least the majority of two simanim, two main pipes. You've got the veshet, which is the food pipe, and you've got the kaneh, which is the wind pipe. So the kaneh, the wind pipe, is made up of multiple tabaot, multiple rings of cartilage. And the top one is called the tabat, closest to the head, and it goes all around the pipe. And you can't slaughter above that point because that's already the head of the animal, and you have to be slaughtering at the throat. So if you didn't cut through all of this tabas and you haven't gone up towards the head of the animal, then the Mishnah says shchita so kashera. It's going to be a valid shchita. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda omer melo hachut al pnei ruba, that it's going to be valid even if you cut the majority, right? So you've cut the majority of the tabas and you've gone above that area. According to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, it's still going to be kosher, even though you have headed up towards the head, but you have gone through the majority of the tabas, of the throat, of the kaneh, the windpipe. Mishnah Daled. Ideally, when shechting an animal, you have to shecht it from the front. What if you cut it from the side? So the halacha is going to be that as long as you don't cut the spinal cord before you reach the simanim, so the spinal cord which runs along the back of the animal's neck, so as long as you don't cut the spinal cord before you've gone through the simanim, before you've gone through the two pipes, it's going to be valid. So this was never said explicitly in the Torah, but it's just a halacha. You can't cut the spine first. That's by shechita. If you recall, there's something called malika, which is the fingernail snip to a bird's neck, and that has to be done from behind, and that is explicit in the Torah. So there's shechita and there's malika, and they're both very different. Hashoichet min hatzdadim. If you shecht an animal from the sides, shechita so kashera, then it's going to be valid as long as you haven't cut the spinal cord first. Hamolek min hatzdadim. If you do malika to a bird from the sides with the fingernail, milikaso pasula, then the malika is going to be invalid because you have to cut the spinal cord first. Hashoichet min ha'oref. If you shecht an animal from the back of the neck, shchita so pasula, then the shchita is going to be invalid. Hamolek min ha'oref. What if you do malika from the back of the neck? That's exactly where you need to do it. Malika so kashera. The malika is valid. Hashochet min hatzavar. If you slaughter the animal from the throat, shchita so kashera. That's exactly where you're supposed to be doing it. Hamolek min hatzavar. If you do malika from the neck, from the throat, from the front, malika so psula, then the malika is going to be invalid. Shekol ha'oref kasher le malika, because the back of the neck is valid for malika, v'cholat savar kasher l'shchita, and the throat is valid for shchita, the entire throat. Nimtza, so what comes out of this? Kasher b'shchita pasul b'malika. Something which can be valid for shchita, for slaughter, is going to be invalid for malika, and kasher b'malika pasul b'shchita. And something that could be valid for malika, translates it on the screen there as pinching, is going to be pasul, is going to be invalid for shchita. Mishnah, hey. Right, so we've had in the previous Mishnah, we had something that was just valid here is invalid here, and vice versa. So now we've got a few more halachas which are to do with something being kosher in one instance and pasul in another instance. So continuing with that kind of structure, we're going to be talking about torin, which are doves, and b'nei Yonah, which are pigeons, as it translates that on the screen. And we're talking about sacrifices. So there are going to be instances where these korbanos, these two types of bird korbanos, you could have an instance where it's the halacha is valid in one of the instances and invalid in the other instance, and vice versa. And it's to do with the ages. Even though fundamentally these birds may come from the same species, to be able to use them for a korban, they have to be different ages. So the Mishnah says, Kasher batorin pasul b'bnei Yonah. It can be valid in one instance. The age can make it fit if you are offering up a tor, and it can be pasul if you're offering up b'nei Yonah. Says the Mishnah, Kasher b'bnei Yonah pasul b'torin. Vice versa, something can make it valid for b'nei Yonah and invalid for a tor. And what does the Mishnah continue with? Tchilat hatzihuv bazeh u bazeh pasul. With the feathers turning yellow, which is a point in time which is in between the two respective ages for these birds, they're going to be invalid for both, because it's an indication that they are not within the halachic age for either a ben Yonah or for a tor, and so they're going to be invalid if either of these birds are having their their feathers start to turn yellow. That indicates that they are both outside of the valid time frame for those two types of birds. Mishnah Vav. We're going to be talking about the para aduma, the red heifer, and the egla arufa, in an instance where somebody is found dead between two towns or two cities. So you would have to shecht an egla arufa. And these have two different types of slaughtering processes. The para aduma would have a regular shchita from the front, and the egla arufa would have to be killed from the back of the neck. So the Mishnah says, kasher b'para pasul be'egla. You can have a halacha where it's valid for the red heifer, but it's invalid and disqualifies the egla arufa. And vice versa, kasher ba'egla, if you were to slaughter the egla from behind the neck, that would be fine, but if you did that to a para aduma, then it would be pasul. Next set of halachas talking about the kohanim and the leviim and their service in the temple, or sorry, I think in the mishkan, in the midbar. So for kohanim, they could start serving from the age of bar mitzvah, and there was a maximum age where they can't continue working. For leviim, we're told that they had to be within the age of 30 to 50. So the Mishnah says, kasher b'kohanim pasul b'leviim. They could be a particular age, which as a Kohen would make them fit for service, but for a Levi would make them unfit for service. And kasher b'leviim pasul b'kohanim. And for a Levi, if a Levi was blemished, he could still sing and he could still open the gates, so he could still serve in his capacity as a Levi. But pasul b'kohanim, if you had a blemished Kohen, then he would not be able to serve in the Mishkan or in the Beis HaMikdash. So that's why it can be fit for a Levite and invalid for a Kohen. Then we've got kli cheres, which is an earthenware vessel, and other vessels. And so there's going to be a tahor b'kli cheres. You can have an instance where an earthenware vessel is pure, but in all other types of vessels, it would be impure. What do we mean? For a kli cheres, you can only contaminate an earthenware vessel if if something touches it from the inside, or if something is suspended inside the airspace of the kli cheres. So if you had something which was impure and you put that inside the vessel, it will contaminate a an earthenware vessel, I believe, even if it's not touching it, even if it's just within the airspace of the inside of that vessel. That's not the case for other vessels, other materials. They will contract tumah if you touch them from the outside or from the inside, but not if it's suspended inside. So, tahor b'kli cheres. If you touch the kli cheres from the outside, it's not going to contaminate it. But tamei b'chol hakelim. But if you touch the outside of the other materials, then it will contaminate it. And tahor b'chol hakelim. If you suspend something which is impure and you suspend it in the airspace of other materials, it's not going to contract tumah. But tamei b'kli cheres. But it is going to contract tumah to the earthenware vessel if you were to suspend it inside. Tahor b'kli 8, tamei b'kli matachos. You can have a wooden vessel and a metal vessel. So the metal vessel is going to contaminate as long as it's being completed, as long as it's finished and it's ready as a kli. With a wooden vessel, it can still contract even if it's not fully finished. Also, with a wooden vessel, it can't contract tumah if it doesn't have a handle. Whereas a metal vessel can contract tumah if it doesn't have a handle. So the Mishnah says, tahor b'kli 8. So if it doesn't have a handle, it's going to be pure. Tamei b'kli matachos. But if it touches a metal vessel which doesn't have a handle, then it will still be tamei. Tahor b'kli matachos. And if a metal vessel has not been finished, its process to make it has not been completed, then if anything touches it, it's still going to be pure. But tamei b'chli 8, but you can have a wooden vessel which hasn't been completed, and it can still contract ritual impurity. Then you've got shkedim hamarim, bitter almonds and sweet almonds, different stages of their growth process. So hachayav b'shkedim hamarim patur b'metukim. You can have a situation where the bitter almonds become chayav, become obligated in separating trumas and maisa, the different tithes, but patur b'metukim. But the sweet almonds are still going to be exempt. Or you can have a situation where the sweet almonds, chayav b'metukim, are going to be obligated, and with the case of bitter almonds, they are going to be patur. So, if you've got bitter almonds which are too bitter and too inedible when they're large, they're not going to be obligated in trumas and maasos. Whereas you can have a very small but edible sweet almond which is going to be chayiv in trumas and maasos. So that was Mishnah Vav. Bit tricky, as we said, but let's move on.
So it's purely down to the fact whether it's edible or not. Because obviously, if it's not edible, then one will separate.
Yeah, only food which is edible is going to be obligated to have the tithes taken from it. So yeah, I guess you could have a bitter almond which is the right size, which should theoretically, I guess, make it obligated in the trumas and maasos, but it's going to be pasul
It's not edible, so
for the sweet almonds because they're not ready yet, I think, or they're. One second, where?
I don't know, could they be too overgrown, too ripe? I don't know.
So shkedim amarim. So bitter almonds, when they're small, they're obligated in Maisa because I guess these are two different types of species of almond rather than the stages of their development. So a bitter almond, you eat it when it's small, before it's really got its bitter taste. But if they were destined to be sweet almonds, they would be patur because they're still too small. And for a sweet one, when they're big, they're chayev, they're obligated in separating, because that's when they are ripened. But when they're katanim, they're going to be patur because it's not the derech, it's not the way to eat them when they're too small. So that's why you can have a situation where the bitter almond is small and so it's obligated, but the sweet almond is still exempt. And the bitter almond, when it's too big, so now it's exempt because it's too bitter. But now your sweet almonds are going to be obligated because they are ripe and sweet and ready to be consumed. Hopefully
It's
that
got nothing to do with a fruit tree where you would have to wait 3 years before you can.
No, that's to do with Orla.
Take its produce.
We're assuming at this point that time's passed. Yeah.
Okay.
Assuming that they are the right age, that's going to be the halacha for them. Okie dokie. Mishnah Zion. This is talking about temed. So temed, we would normally translate it as mead, and what it means, it's a juice made by pouring water over the sediments of grapes. So it gives it a wine-like color, but it has also different stages to its production. So, and different halachic implications. Before it's fermented, before this mead has fermented, it has a halacha of water. Even though it's discolored, it's a wine-like color. If it's not yet fermented, it has the halacha of water. And after it's fermented, it has the halacha of beer. It's like beer. So that's going to have a knock-on effect for two different types of halachas. Number one is whether it's going to be subject to being separated from Ma'aseh Sheni as a grape, a product of the grapes, and so if it's still water, then you don't have to take Ma'aseh Sheni. If it's now this alcoholic beverage, this fermented beverage, then you do have to take Ma'aseh from it. And the second halacha that it impacts on is, what if you have a volume of this drink that falls into a mikveh? So a mikveh which has got the natural water which has been collected in this mikveh, so there has to be 40 sa'ah. But there's a threshold. If you've got less than 40 sa'ah, and then 3 log of drawn water, so non-natural water, falls into the mikveh. So if 3 log of this drawn water falls into a mikveh, it's going to make the mikveh unfit for use. So if the temed has the status of water, then it's going to invalidate the mikveh. But if it has the status of beer, then when other liquids fall into a mikveh, it's not going to invalidate it unless it changes the color. So let's assume this temed is now with the status of beer and it falls into the mikveh and it doesn't discolor the water, so then that's going to be fine. So the Mishnah says, Hatemed, ad shelo hechmitz, before it's fermented, while it's still got a status of water, eino nikach bekesef ma'aseh, then you're not going to be able to redeem it in Jerusalem as Ma'aseh Sheni and then buy anything with that money. Uposa lesa mikvah, and if it falls into a mikvah of less than 40 sa'ah, it's going to invalidate the mikvah because it's drawn water, not natural water. Misha hechmitz, once it ferments and it has a halachic status as beer, nikach bekesef ma'aseh. So then it does have value with regards to Ma'aseh Sheni, and you can buy this temed with money of Ma'aseh Sheni. Ve'eno posa lesa mikvah. But it's not going to disqualify a mikvah as well if it falls in, because it doesn't have the status of drawn water. It has the status of other liquids. Whew. Then we move on to another halachic area. And this is talking about kalbon and ma'aseh behema. What is a kalbon? A kalbon is if you remember when we learnt shekalim and we talked about the donation of machatzitz hashekel, so there was a halacha that if you were paying machatzitz hashekel, or two people were paying 1 shekel, then there was this bonus called a kalbon, something that was added onto it. But if you were paying for somebody else, then you don't have to pay the kalbon. Fine, very good. What about for Maisa Behema? So for every 10 new animals, 1 was set aside as a sacrifice, as Maisa Behema. But if the animal was owned in partnership, then you would not need to set aside this animal for Maisa Behema. So the question is going to be that you've got brothers who are inheriting assets, and they're dividing the assets, and then they're becoming partners. So if they inherit as partners, that's going to have a different impact and a different practical implication for halacha for different things. So, ha'achin hashutafin, if you have brothers who are partners, k'shechayavim bekalban, while they might be obligated in giving this kalban, this bonus, why would they be chayav in it? Because they become partners after they have to give their machatzis hashekel. So they are paying together 1 shekel between them. So they're now obligated in this bonus. But puturim mimasa behema, but they're going to be exempt from giving masa behema because they are now partners. K'shechayavin b'masa behema, but if they were chayav in giving the masa behema because they weren't yet partners, then they are going to be puturim in a kalbon. Then they're going to be exempt from the bonus because they were paying for the other person, but not as partners. So when you're paying on behalf of someone else, you don't have to pay the kalbon. Oh, easy peasy, right, guys? Have we even finished Perek Aleph yet? No, oh my gosh, we're still on the first chapter. Guys, we might only do 1 chapter tonight. Let's see how we go. Kol makom sheyesh mecher ein kanas. Now this is going to get us into some tricky water. So halachically, alpi halacha, if a girl is under the age of 12 years old, so a father halachically was able to sell his daughter as a slave, as a servant, to a Jewish owner. And that was known as mecher. Until the age of 12, the father, if the financial situation was so precarious, he was halachically able to sell his daughter until the age of 12. Now there's another halacha, which is that if a man was to violate a young woman, then he would have to pay a kanas. So until the age of 12, a father can sell his daughter. After the age of 12, if the girl was to be violated, then the abuser would have to pay a fine, and that comes into effect from the age of 12. So the Mishnah says, Kol makom sheyesh mecher, any place or any instance where there would be a concept of mecher, because she's not yet 12 years old, by the very logic of the definition, ein knas, there would be no fine imposed if an abuser was to violate her. V'chol makom sheyesh knas, but if the girl was already over 12, and so this knas would be imposed, ein mecher, then there would be no concept of the father being able to sell his child because she is already too old to be able to do so. Not a pretty halacha to have to deal with. Kol makom sheyesh miyun ein chalitza. On top of that, rabbinically, a girl under the age of 12 could be married off by her family. From the age of 12, she would be able to reject that marriage herself. Chalitza is the halacha that if a husband dies childless, then other brothers halachically would have been able to perform the mitzvah of yibum and marry that girl. And chalitza is the process where if they decide not to get married, then the process of dissolving any kind of relationship between them would be known as chalitza. So kol makom sheyesh miyun, any instance where the halacha of miyun may apply because she is under the age of 12, ein chalitza. The logic will dictate to us that the halacha of chalitza cannot apply because she is not over the age of 12. V'chol makom sheyesh chalitza, in any instance where the halacha of yibum and chalitza would apply because she's over the age of 12, ein miyun. The halacha of miyun would not apply because she's not under the age of 12. And then the final halacha that we explore in chapter 1 is to do with blowing the shofar before the onset of Shabbos. So on Erev Shabbos there would be 6 shofar blasts that would be blown. But what if Yom Tov was falling on a Friday? So Yom Tov is Friday and it's leading into Shabbos. Would they still blow a shofar to be able to announce the onset of Shabbos? And the other question is, would there be a Havdalah process between Yom Tov into Shabbos? So the Mishnah says, Kol makom sheyesh tekiah, any place where there would be a tekiah, so if Yom Tov was on Friday, there would still be shofar blasts, but ein Havdalah. You wouldn't make Havdalah from Yom Tov into Shabbos, because Shabbos is the greater Kedusha, so we're not making Havdalah between the lesser Kedusha of Yom Tov into the greater Kedusha of Shabbos. V'chol makom sheyesh Havdalah, and in an instance where Yom Tov was on Sunday, so there is going to be Havdalah between Shabbos to Yom Tov, even though there's still the Kedusha of Yom Tov, you make Havdalah between Shabbos into Yom Tov, but ein tekiah. There's no shofar blasts to announce the onset of Yom Tov. So where you can have an instance of making Havdalah, you wouldn't have the shofar blasts. To finish off chapter 1, Yom Tov shechal lihiyos be'erev Shabbos. If Yom Tov was falling on a Friday, tok in v'lo mavdilin, then you would blow the shofar to announce the onset of Shabbos, but you wouldn't make Havdalah between Yom Tov to Shabbos. And b'motzoi Shabbos, mavdilin v'lo tokin. You would make Havdalah from Saturday night into Yom Tov, but v'lo tokin, but you would not blow the shofar to announce that Yom Tov is starting. Keitzad mavdilin, what is the process of making Havdalah? What is the phrase that we would say to be able to separate and distinguish between Shabbos and Yom Tov? So the first position in the Mishnah says, Hamavdil ben kodesh lakodesh. We will be familiar with this because this is what we say. When we are moving from Shabbos into Yom Tov, we say the bracha of Hamavdil ben kodesh lakodesh. Rabbi Dosa says that actually what the phrase that you would say is ben kodesh chamur lakodesh hakal, from the stricter sanctity of Shabbos into the more lenient or lighter sanctity of Yom Tov. Mazal Tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing chapter 1 of Maseches Chullin. It was a long chapter, so just give me an indication as to whether we want to push on and crack on with chapter 2. We've only been going 37 minutes, so it's not the end of the world, but it's your call, guys. Move on to chapter 2.
Yeah, it's a long chapter. It's up to you.
All right, let's give it a go. And just flag me down when it's time to call it a night. So, chapter 2. How much do we need to be slaughtering of an animal or a bird for it to be considered a valid slaughtering? So, says the Mishnah. So we've talked about these simanim. So really we need to get through most of the 2 simanim, the 2 pipes, the food pipe and the windpipe. But there is a halacha that if you only get through one, it's still going to be valid. So for a bird especially, one siman is going to be valid. It's not ideal, but it's going to be valid. And for an animal or for a bird, as long as you got through 50% of those pipes, then it's going to be valid, if I'm not mistaken. So says the Mishnah, Perek Beis, Mishnah Aleph, chapter 2, Mishnah 1. Hashoichet echad ba'of. If you slaughter one siman of a bird, ushnayim ba'behema, and you slaughter 2 simanim of an animal, shchitaso kashera. It is going to be a valid slaughter. V'rubo shel echad kamohu. And if you get through the majority of one of the pipes, then it's kamohu. It's as if you've got through the whole of the pipe, the whole of the siman. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ad sheyishchot es havridin. Rabbi Yehuda says it's not going to be valid until you have cut through the vridin, the major blood vessels of the neck. Did I need to show you a picture of the vridin? I'm not going to show you a picture of the vridin. It's literally, you can see the chicken's head in the picture. Let's leave that one to our own imaginations. So Rabbi Yehuda says you have to get through the veins, the vridin of the neck. Chatzi echad ba'of. If you cut through one half of the simanim of a bird, ve'echad v'chetzi ba'behema, you get through 1.5 simanim of a behema, shchitaso pasula, it's going to be invalid. Rov echad ba'of, if you get through the majority of one of the simanim, varov shnayim babahema, and the majority of both simanim for the animal, then shchitaso kashera, it is going to be a valid shchita, even if it's not the most ideal way. It is still going to be valid. Mishnah base. What if you are trying to slaughter more than one animal in one go? So hashochet shnei rashin ke'echad, you're slaughtering 2 heads at once. So the Mishnah says, shchitaso kashera, the slaughter is going to be valid. You can't do this for korbanot, but you can do it for food, al pi halacha. Says the Mishnah, shnaim ochazin b'sakin v'shochatin, you've got 2 people who are holding onto the knife, and they are doing the slaughter together. Afilu echad lemala ve'echad lemata, even if one person is holding the knife above and one holding the knife below, shchitasan kashera. How does that work? Sorry. How do you have 2 people holding one knife, slaughtering at 2 different points in the neck? I don't think they're holding the same knife. I think you've got 2 people who are holding a knife each, and they're at different points of the neck, and they are slaughtering the animal. So the Mishnah says that the shechita is going to be valid. Does that make sense to you, Mark?
Does seem to imply that it's one knife, but you're quite right, doesn't make sense.
Well,
2 people may hold a knife. Must be a knife each.
let's see if I can find it in my things.
But it says even if each is holding a knife.
It says behema achas, they're slaughtering one animal. No, it is one knife. One is holding one side of the handle, and the other is holding the other side of the handle. So they are slaughtering one animal with one knife, holding from 2 parts of the handle. I just don't understand. I don't understand that point on the screen there of each one slaughtering at a different point in the neck. I'm not sure. So we'll pretend like it never existed. Mishnah Gimel. Says the Mishnah.
Could it?
Yeah, go on.
Could it be that they're holding the knife on an angle? So
they're holding it each end. So one's holding the handle and one's holding the end of the knife.
So one's drawing it up and the other one's drawing it down.
Yeah.
But what's that got to do with 2 points of the neck?
Well, because you've got one of them holding, well, you've got possibly both of them holding both, say, chickens. So I can't imagine they could do it with any other livestock.
Well, you could be doing it with an animal, and then it's a bigger knife with a bigger handle.
Yeah, but this is suggesting 2 animals, isn't it?
No. It's one. It's 2 people holding one knife and slaughtering one animal.
Right. So I reckon it's not.
And so even if one is holding the handle up here, let's say, and one is holding the handle further down the handle, it's still going to be kosher, right? The bit that's baffling me is this line on the screen, which says with each one slaughtering at a different point in the neck. Visually, I can't understand what that's doing for me.
Well,
I was doing all right. I was doing all right visually until the screen Safaria over there threw that line in there, and I don't think I need that line to.
I reckon it's because you've got a within which you can perform shechita on the neck, and you've got one person at a higher position and another person at a lower position pulling the blade through, whereas what would be preferable is to have a cut going straight across.
Okay.
Follow me. So they're performing shechita on an angle rather than straight across.
Very good, Richard. Shkoyach. Mishnah Gimel. Says the Mishnah, Hitis esarosh bevas achas. If you cut right through and decapitate the head in one shot, the Mishnah says, psula. It's going to be invalid. Haya shoichet v'hitis esharosh bevas achas. If you were slaughtering in the regular way and you decapitated the animal in one go, says the Mishnah, Im yesh basakin melo tzavar kashera. If there is enough space, I guess, on the blade still, equivalent to the breadth of the neck, then it's going to be kashera. Bamed dvarim amurim. What are we talking about over here? Bisman sheholich velo hevi. That is if where's it? Am I in the right place? No, I'm not in the right place. That's why. So if there's enough space on the blade of the knife, which is the length of which is the same. If there's at least the breadth of the knife's worth of blade, then kasher, then it's going to be valid. If you are slaughtering and you decapitate two heads in the process, then the Mishnah says, Im yesh basakin milot savar echad kashera. If there is within the length of the knife enough space to equivalent space of the breadth of one animal, then the Mishnah says kashera is going to be valid. Bamed dvarim amarim. When are we talking about that we have to be thinking about the length of the knife? Bisman sheholich velo hevi. That is when you've taken the knife one way but not brought it back another way, or hevi velo holich, or you've taken it the other way but not yet brought it back the other way. Aval im holich vehevi, but if you've gone in two directions, afilu kol shehu, even if it's just the tiniest amount, drawing it back, afilu beizmel kashera, then even if it was done with a scalpel, the halacha is saying that the slaughter is valid. I'm not sure that I can properly visualize that, but hopefully you guys have. Nafla sakin v'shachata. If you drop the knife v'shachata, and the knife, while it was in the middle of shchita, the knife falls, and it completes the shchita without you holding on to it. Afal pisha shachata kadarka, even if it's done everything in the right way, pasula, it's still going to be invalid. Why? Because the pasuk says shne'emar in Devarim chapter 27 verse 7, ve'zavachta, it says that you shall slaughter, ve'achalta, and in the same verse it says ve'achalta. Masha ata zaveach ata ochel. In the same way that you have to slaughter, you have to eat. So since it's you, or since it is a person that is eating, it also has to be a person that is slaughtering. And so if it fell, that's not considered a person slaughtering. It's considered the knife just cutting through. Nafla sakin v'higbiha. So if the knife fell and he picked it up and then completed the slaughter, naflu chelav v'higbihan. If his clothing fell and he lifted it up and then completed the slaughter. or hishchiz esasakin, or he was sharpening his knife, va'af, and then got tired, and he grew weary before completing the slaughter, uva chavero b'shachat, and then someone else came and did the rest of the slaughtering. Im shaha kadei shchita, if there was enough of an interruption, that enough time passed that he could have done an entire shchita process by himself, psula. In all of these instances, the shchita is going to be invalid. Rabbi Shimon says that the length of time that would need to pass by before the shchita becomes invalid is imshaha kadei bikur, enough time equivalent to the length needed to inspect, to examine the knife, which is that going to be a shorter time or a longer time? I think that might be a longer time. So I think according to the Rabbi Shimon, you've got a longer time to be able to have an interruption between two people slaughtering. But according to the first position in the Mishnah, which is the accepted halacha, it's that shorter time of being able to conduct another shchita, as it were. Mishnah Daled. Okie Mishnah Dalet says as follows: Shachat et esa veshet, a person slaughters the veshet, which is the food pipe, ufasak esa gargeres, and he severed the windpipe. So he hasn't done shchita per se to the gargeres, to the windpipe. He has severed it, but not through the swipe of the shechita. Or shachat es gargeres, or he has done the appropriate shechita through the windpipe, ufasak es aveshet, but he has not. I think, as we can see there, it's a back and forth movement. So on the return visit, he severs the food pipe, or sheshachat echad mehen v'hintin la ad shemeta, or he's slaughtered through one of the simanim, through one of the pipes, and then he waits until the animal dies before doing the second one. Or shehechalid es hasakin tachas hasheni ufsako, or what's going to be shehechalid, or he cuts through one, he slides through one of the simanim, and then he waits underneath the second siman and then severs it from below. Rabbi Yeshevav says not only is it invalid, but nevela is actually a carcass and it can contract tumah. Rabbi Akiva Omer treifa. Rabbi Akiva says it doesn't have the status of a carcass, it has the status of a treifa. And although you're not allowed to eat it because it's not kosher, it's not going to contract tumah. Klal Amar Rabbi Yeshevav Mishum Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yeshevav laid out a general principle in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua. Kol shenifsala b'shchitasa nevela. If you create an invalidation through your shchita process, it's going to render the animal a carcass and it's going to contract tumah. Kol shechitasa karaui. If the shechita was done appropriately, v'davar acher garam la lipasa, and something else causes it to become unfit, then terefa. Then it's going to be considered a treifa, and it's not going to be allowed to be eaten, but it's also not going to contract tumah. And then the Mishnah says that v'hoda lo Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda actually conceded to that general klal. Mishnah Hey. Biblically, for food to be able to contract tumah, it has to come into contact with one of 7 liquids. So we can guess that water is going to be one of those liquids, but did we know that blood is another one of those liquids? So if blood is a liquid that can make something susceptible to being contaminated by ritual impurity, then what about the blood that comes out of an animal during the shechita? So only the blood from the neck at the shechita can make an animal susceptible for tumah. So the Mishnah says, "Hashoichet behema chaya va'of v'lo yatsa mehen dam." If you were to slaughter an animal, or a chaya, a wild animal, or a bird, v'lo yatsa mehen dam, and blood did not come out, so then ksherim, they're going to be fit for consumption. V'ne'echalim biyadayim mesuavos, and they can even be eaten with mesoavot, hands, dirty hands, as it were, hands which have not been purified for eating things which are tahor. Because the absence of blood has meant that the animal has not been made susceptible to tumah. So Rabbi Shimon says, Huchsharu b'shchita. No, the shchita actually makes them susceptible to be mekabel tumah, to be contaminated by tumah, even if there was no blood, and that's because the shchita permits it to be eaten. So there you go, an interesting machlokes over there. That if no blood was to come out, would it make it susceptible to contamination or not? Mishnah Vav. Pardon me?
Question for you.
Good luck.
If an animal becomes treifat because of the way it's been slaughtered,
Right.
does the blade then need to be kashered, or is it only in need of kashering if it's hot? If it comes into contact with heat.
So, if the animal makes it a treifat, then does
the knife then
need to be pure? Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Ask your local halachic authority. Good question, eh?
If I see it.
If you see it, yeah. We're coming up for an hour, guys. How are we feeling?
You're cool.
Michael,
You
what?
haven't had supper.
Pardon me?
I said you haven't had supper yet, so it's your call.
Well, I can keep going. I've got my target of wanting to get through a chapter, but it is a long chapter. So, if you guys want to go for it, we'll go for it. It's Torah at the end of the day. What do you want to do?
Right.
Keep going? We're hardcore, guys. It's not even chivalrous. Okay, Mishnah Vav. So, shchita has to cause the death of an animal, not anything else. That's the premise to this Mishnah, if I'm not mistaken. So says the Mishnah, Hashoichet es hamesukenes. If you slaughter an animal that was in danger of death, for example, because it's old. So what has caused the death? Is it the fact that it's old, or is it the shechita? So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that it's going to be valid if ad shetafar case bayad uvaragel. So if the animal is convulsing, then it's going to be a valid shechita, I guess, because that indicates to us that the death has come about because of the shechita. Rabbi Eliezer Omer daya imzinka. Rabbi Eliezer says it's going to be sufficient. Oh, that's interesting. If it says on the screen, if blood spurted from the neck, in my notes I have here that if it groans, so if it lets out a groan, that's going to be enough of an indication that the death was caused by the shechita. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, Af hashoichet balayla ulamachar hishkim umatza kasolim maleim dam kashera. Shezinka uchmidas Rabbi Eliezer. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that even if you slaughtered the animal at night and the next day you woke up and found that the walls were full of blood, the neck area is full of blood, kashera, it's going to be valid because it's going to be clear that the blood has spurted, which does cause a problem for me, shazinka meaning groaning, because that wouldn't necessarily make sense. Uchamidas Rabbi Eliezer. in accordance with the rule of Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim say, Ad Tfarkes or Bayad or Baragel, that it has to have convulsed its leg, its foreleg or its hind leg, or Ad Shetechash Keish Biznava, or that it has wagged its tail. Echad Behema Daka ve'echad Behema Gasa, whether it's a small animal or a large animal, that's the threshold that the Chachamim are requiring, which is more lenient than the first position. Behema daka shepashta yada velo hechazira. If a behema daka, a small animal, was to extend its foreleg and wasn't able to bring it back into position, then the Mishnah says psula. Then it's not going to be valid. She'ena ela hotzas nefesh bilvad, because that is I've got here rigor mortis. That is only an indication of rigor mortis. And not a convulsion that indicates life. Bamer devarim amurim. When is this halacha stated in relation to? What is this halacha stated in relation to? Shahaisa bechezkas mesukenes. That's when the animal was in danger of imminent death. Aval him haisa bechezkas bria. But if it was a generally healthy animal, then even if you didn't get any of these indicators, the shechita is going to be valid. Mishnah Zion says the Mishnah, Hashoichet lanachri. If you slaughter for a non-Jew, so it's slaughtered by a Jew, but it's slaughtered for a non-Jew, and I think it's owned by a non-Jew perhaps as well. Shchitaso kasher, then it's going to be valid, and it would be valid even for a Jew to be able to eat it. For Rabbi Eliezer posel, Rabbi Eliezer says that it would be invalid for a Jew to be able to eat it. Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, Afilu shechata sheyechal hanachri mechatza kaved shala pasula. Even if the Jew slaughtered the animal with the intention of giving the non-Jew the diaphragm, the lobe of the liver, which would be for medicinal purposes. So even if you are shechting it for a non-Jew with the intention of giving him the part of a body that would be used for medicine, psula, it would still be invalid. Because we have to presume that the mindset of the nochri, of the non-Jew, we have to presume that his mindset during the time of shechita was actually for avodah zarah, and so therefore, even if it's a Jew slaughtering it, it's going to be unfit for a Jew to be able to have any benefit, any consumption from it, because we have to presume that the mindset of the non-Jew was that this animal should be slaughtered for idol worship. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Kal v'chomer hadvarim. We can I think teach this as a kal v'chomer. Umar b'makom shehamachashava poseles b'mukdashin. So, if you recall, we taught by sacrifices that there were 4 ways that you could invalidate a sacrifice, and one of them was at the point of shechita. So, just like with a sacrifice where the wrong mindset can invalidate it, ein hakol holech ela acha ha'oved, and with regards to a sacrifice, then everything follows only. Okay, fine. So, b'makom shemachshava poseles b'mikdashim. With regards to sacrifices, where the mindset is going to invalidate, but only the one who's sacrificing is going to cause that invalidation. So it only goes after the one doing the service. Makom she'ein machshava poseles b'chullin. So with regards to non-sacrificial animals, where the wrong mindset is not invalidating the animal's validity for its shechita, so then the non-Jew should have no bearing over here, because the logic should dictate that kol v'chomer, it's only going to be dependent on the slaughterer's mindset. The slaughterer could only invalidate a korban if he had the wrong mindset. Doesn't matter what the other guy thought. So why should it be any different by Chullin, which is a non-sacrifice? Even if the non-Jew has the wrong mindset, it's got nothing to do with the guy doing the slaughtering, and so it shouldn't invalidate the animal according to Rabbi Yossi. Mishnah Ches. If a person did slaughter the animal with the intention of it being for avodah zarah, for idol worship, but had in mind something attached to the ground that cannot become prohibited for benefit if served. Okay. Let's see if I can understand what that means. Hashochet l'shem harin. Okay, I've got it now. If you are slaughtering an animal as a gesture of avodah zarah, but you are doing it for a mountain, you are doing it to worship a mountain which is attached to the ground, and something which is attached to the ground cannot be forbidden to benefit from if it was served. So examples of this: harim, mountains; l'shem gvaos, for hills; l'shem yamim, he's slaughtering it to worship the sea; he's slaughtering it l'shem naharos, to worship a river; l'shem midbarot, to worship a desert. Shchitaso pasula, it's going to make the shechita invalid, but it's not going to make those entities that he was worshipping forbidden for benefit. Shnayim ochazin besakim v'shachatin. You've got two people holding onto the knife to slaughter. Echad l'shem. One is doing it with the right mindset for Hashem, and echad mikol elu. And the second guy is slaughtering it to be able to worship one of these entities. Ve'echad l'shem davar kasher. Let's try that again. Okay. Echad l'shem echad mikol elu. One of them is doing it with the intention of worshipping one of these entities. Ve'echad l'shem davar kasher, and one of them has the right mindset. Then shchitaso pasula, and then it's going to invalidate not the sacrifice. It's going to invalidate the animal that is being slaughtered. But if the second guy was just helping, and he's not doing the shechita himself, then it doesn't matter what his mindset is. It won't invalidate it if the guy who's doing the shechita has the right mindset. Mishnah tests things which are prohibited because it looks like you are doing it for avodah zarah. Ein shochatin lo letoch yamim. You may not slaughter an animal so that the blood flows into the sea. Velo letoch naharos, or that it flows into a river. Velo letoch kelim, and not so that it slaughters into vessels, because in each of these instances it's going to be looking like you're performing a sacrifice, not trying to kill an animal for food. Aval shochet hu letoch uga shel mayim, but you are allowed to slaughter it into a cistern of dirty water, because that wouldn't be a gesture or mistaken for avodah zarah. Uvasfina. Pardon me?
So I thought you had to cover the blood with earth.
Okay, but this is saying that at the time of the slaughter, you can't do it into one of these places. Oh, you're saying how would you be able to cover it up if you've done it into this cistern of water?
Yeah.
Well, I think because it's dirty water, maybe it's like it's been covered up. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Richard, I just don't know. I just don't know enough. Uvasfina, or you are on a ship and slaughtering an animal. Al gabe kalim, you could slaughter it into vessels, because it's clear that you're trying to just avoid getting the boat dirty, and you're not trying to do it for avodah zarah. Ein shochatin leguma kol ikka, you shouldn't slaughter into a pit, a small hole, at all. And it's interesting, I've got a note here, whether it's inside the house or outside. Aval osa guma betoch beito, but you can make a hole in your house, bishvil shikane sadam latocha, so that the blood will go into it. And then I guess that's not the same as slaughtering directly into it. Uvashuk lo yasechein, but out in the marketplace you shouldn't do so. Shelo yechake es aminim, in order that the heretics should not try and copy you. So that is Mishnah Ches. No, was that no? It was Mishnah Tes. So the reason for this, it seems, having this guma, is that this is what heretics would do inside their house or outside the house. So you can't shecht it into it, but you can have the hole inside your house so that the blood will flow into it. You just can't slaughter directly into that hole. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, Mishnah Yud of Maseches Chullin chapter 2. Biblically, if a person slaughters non-sacrificial animals with the mindset of doing it as a korban, you're not going to turn it into a korban because you're not in the temple. And it's only when you've got a korban which has been designated as a korban where your mindset can make it invalid. So therefore, if you say that you're going to bring a voluntary sacrifice, so you may say that you're going to bring an ola, you're going to bring a shlamim, then midrabanan, you're going to invalidate the animal for two reasons. Number one, because you've consecrated it and killed it. And number two, because you've done it outside of the Beis Hamikdash. But if you are slaughtering an obligatory sacrifice, and it's clear that there's no reason for you to be bringing it, then nobody's going to think that you've actually consecrated it. Let's see if that helps us understand Mishnah Yud, guys. Hashochet l'shem ola. So you are slaughtering an animal outside of the temple, and you're doing it with the designation of an ola, which is a voluntary sacrifice. Or l'shem zvachim, you're doing it as... Oh, I'm in the wrong place here, I need to scroll down for you guys. Or you're doing it for the sake of a shlamim, for a peace offering. Or l'shem asham talui, or you are slaughtering this animal as a limbo asham. L'shem pesach, or you're slaughtering this animal as a korban pesach, but it's not pesach, it's not the right time of year, which would give it still the status of a shlamim, so it's still a voluntary sacrifice. L'shem toda, or you have the mindset that it is a thanksgiving offering. Says the Mishnah, shichitaso pasula, then it's going to be invalid because people are going to think very, very bad things. For Rabbi Shimon says it's machshir, it is going to be valid because it's clear that it's not a sacrifice. Shnaim ochazin v'sakin v'shoichatin. If you've got two people holding onto a knife and sacrificing, echad l'shem echad mikol elu. One has in mind that he is slaughtering it for one of these types of sacrifices. V'echad l'shem davar kasher. And the other guy has a valid mindset when he is slaughtering this animal. Then the Mishnah says shchitaso pasula. Then the Mishnah says the shchita is going to be invalid. What if, says the Mishnah, hashoichet l'shem chatas? It's an obligatory offering, it's a sin offering, and that's his mindset. L'shem asham vadai, he has the mindset of it being a guilt offering. L'shem bechor, he has the mindset that he's slaughtering it for the purpose of a bechor. L'shem maseh, or because of its being the 10th of his animals. L'shem tamura, or for the sake of it being a substitute offering, but he's not doing it in the Beis Hamikdash. Shchitaso kashera. Then the Mishnah very intriguingly says it's going to be a kosher, fit for use shchita, because obviously he is not doing it for a compulsory sacrifice because he's not in the temple. Finishes the Mishnah. It's a complete chapter 2. Zehaklal, this is the rule. Kol davar shenidar v'nidav. Any item, any animal, anything which can be consecrated voluntarily, hashoichet lishmo asur. Then if you go and shech that with that in mind, and you're outside the Beis Hamikdash, then it's not going to be allowed. But if it's not a voluntary or a gift offering, and it's compulsory, and you're outside the temple, hashoichet lishmo kasher. Then if you slaughter it with that mindset, then it's still going to be kasher, because we're not going to think that it's actually consecrated as a korban, because it's not in the Beis Hamikdash. Mazel tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing chapter 2. And that is all we have got time for, or that I think our brains can really handle for tonight. So thank you all so much for joining us back on Mishnah Mastery. We will see you again, please God, next week for chapter 3. And please God, even if we are lucky, we will do chapter 4 as well. And we will see you next time. Take care.